The sterile glow of the hospital lobby was a familiar comfort after long shifts. As I leaned against the reception desk, I absent-mindedly tapped my pen on the counter, lost in thoughts about the mundane tasks awaiting me at home. It was then that my phone rang, disrupting my reverie. "Ms. Adams." The voice on the other end was smooth and authoritative. "This is Charles Thompson from Ellis Management. I'm calling regarding a private nursing position we have available. Your resume came highly recommended." I straightened up, trying to shake off the drowsiness. "Yes, I'm Megan Adams. How can I help you?" "We're offering you a position to care for Mr. Thomas Ellis," Charles continued. "He's an elderly gentleman who requires full-time care. The salary is $5,000 a month, with all living expenses covered. We believe you're the ideal candidate for this role." I blinked in surprise. The offer seemed unusually generous for a position that, by all accounts, was relatively straightforward. "That's quite a substantial offer," I said carefully. "Could you tell me more about Mr. Ellis's condition and why the compensation is so high?" Charles's tone remained steady. "Mr. Ellis is currently in a vegetative state. The offer reflects the level of care required and the unique nature of the role. I assure you, this is a legitimate and serious position." I mulled over his words. The high salary often came with hidden complications, and I couldn't help but feel a twinge of suspicion. "I see. When would you like to arrange a meeting to discuss this further?" "Tomorrow morning, if possible. We'd like to move quickly." "I'll send you the address and details via email," Charles replied. "We're confident you'll find the arrangement satisfactory." As I hung up, my curiosity and skepticism were in equal measure. What lay beneath the surface of this seemingly perfect offer? The next morning, I arrived at the grand estate of Mr. Thomas Ellis. The mansion's imposing facade and manicured gardens spoke of old wealth and tradition. I was greeted at the door by a well-dressed butler who led me through an opulent hallway to a study where Charles Thompson awaited me. "Ms. Adams, it's a pleasure to meet you in person," Charles said, extending his hand. "Please, have a seat." "Thank you, Mr. Thompson," I said, taking the seat opposite him. "I'm here to learn more about the position." Charles handed me a folder with Mr. Ellis's medical records and a detailed job description. "As you can see, Mr. Ellis requires constant care. His condition means he's completely unresponsive, but we've taken measures to ensure he's comfortable." I scanned through the documents, noting the medical jargon and details about Mr. Ellis's condition. "Everything seems in order," I said, "but I still have some questions. Why such a generous salary?" Charles leaned forward slightly, a knowing smile on his face. "Mr. Ellis is a very private individual with substantial assets. The compensation reflects not just the role but also the level of discretion required. His family values their privacy greatly." Before I could probe further, the butler entered, announcing, "Mr. Ellis is ready to meet you now." Charles stood and motioned for me to follow. We walked down a long corridor, the sound of our footsteps echoing off the marble floors. The butler opened a door to a beautifully decorated bedroom, where Mr. Ellis lay in a large canopied bed. Mr. Ellis appeared to be asleep, his face serene but unresponsive. Charles introduced me. "Mr. Ellis, this is Megan Adams. She's considering the position." "Hello, Mr. Ellis," I said softly, though I wasn't sure if he could hear me. I noticed a faint, almost imperceptible twitch in his fingers, but I couldn't be sure if it was a reflex or a sign of awareness. Charles smiled reassuringly. "We'll leave you to get acquainted. Please let us know if you have any further questions." As Charles and the butler departed, I remained by Mr. Ellis's side, feeling a strange mixture of anticipation and doubt. The generous offer, combined with the secrecy surrounding the job, left me with more questions than answers. The following morning, I arrived at the estate, ready to start my new role. I was eager to understand more about Mr. Ellis and the mysterious circumstances surrounding the job. After settling into my new quarters, I made my way to Mr. Ellis's room. The room was immaculate, with sunlight filtering through the sheer curtains, casting a warm glow over Mr. Ellis's bed. I gently approached him, as I had done in the past few days, and began my routine check. "Good morning, Mr. Ellis," I said softly, adjusting the covers around him. "How are we feeling today?" As I adjusted the blanket, I noticed a small, almost imperceptible movement in his eyes, a flicker of awareness that I had missed previously. My heart raced with curiosity and apprehension. I leaned closer to him, speaking more directly. "Mr. Ellis, if you can hear me, please try to move your fingers." To my astonishment, his fingers twitched deliberately. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. "Are you able to understand me?" A subtle but definite nod followed, and I nearly dropped the stethoscope I was holding. "It's true then, you're conscious," I said, my voice a mix of excitement and disbelief. "Why have you been pretending to be in a vegetative state?" Mr. Ellis's eyes conveyed a mix of urgency and sadness. "They're coming," he whispered, his voice barely audible, but unmistakably clear. "Who's coming?" I asked, my concern growing. "My children," he said, his voice trembling. "James and Laura. They'd been plotting to kill me to inherit my fortune." I stared at him, stunned. "You're saying they want to kill you? Why would they do that?" "Money can corrupt even the closest of families," he replied. "They've grown impatient with waiting for my death and believe that if they act now, they'll be able to claim everything. I need your help to stop them." I felt a chill run down my spine. "What can I do? How can we prevent this?" "We need to gather evidence," Mr. Ellis said. "We must be careful, though. If they suspect anything, they might act sooner. I need you to help me collect proof of their intentions." Over the next few days, I worked discreetly with Mr. Ellis. We communicated through subtle gestures and low whispers, gathering evidence while maintaining the facade of normalcy. I would make small talk with James and Laura during their visits, trying to gauge their behavior and intentions. One afternoon, James and Laura arrived together, their faces set in grim determination. They began discussing their plans loudly enough for me to overhear, while I pretended to check Mr. Ellis's vitals in the corner. "We need to act soon," James said, his voice tense. "The longer we wait, the more chance we have of getting caught." Laura nodded in agreement. "I know, but we have to be careful. We can't let anyone suspect anything. We need to ensure it looks like a natural death." My heart pounded as I recorded their conversation on my phone, hidden in my pocket. I carefully made my way back to Mr. Ellis's room, where I recounted the conversation. "They're definitely planning something," I said, showing him the recording. "We need to be cautious. We have enough evidence now, but we must act carefully to avoid tipping them off." Mr. Ellis's face was a mask of resolve. "You've done well, Megan. We'll need to make our next move carefully. I'll contact the authorities once we have everything in place." That evening, I sat by Mr. Ellis's bedside, feeling a mix of fear and determination. "Do you think they'll suspect us if we move too soon?" "They might," Mr. Ellis said, his voice firm despite his weakened condition. "We need to ensure the evidence is undeniable. Only then will the authorities be able to act decisively." As I watched the sun set outside the window, casting long shadows across the room, I couldn't shake the feeling of impending danger. The stakes were high, but I was committed to seeing this through, determined to help Mr. Ellis and ensure justice was served. The days that followed were filled with a tense mix of vigilance and subtle action. Mr. Ellis and I worked tirelessly to uncover enough evidence to expose James and Laura's plot, while maintaining the illusion that everything was normal. I made sure to keep my interactions with James and Laura casual and inconspicuous. During their visits, I focused on picking up any clues that could help build our case. One afternoon, as I was preparing Mr. Ellis for his scheduled visit from James and Laura, I received a text from Mr. Ellis instructing me to ask James about the family's financial matters during their visit. I knew this was a delicate maneuver, but I had to be careful not to arouse suspicion. When James and Laura arrived, I greeted them warmly. trying to keep my demeanor natural. "Mr. Ellis mentioned that he wanted to discuss some family matters with you," I said. "I'm just here to assist." "Of course," James replied, his voice tight. "We're here to ensure everything is in order." Laura, sitting beside him, gave a curt nod. "We want to make sure Dad's affairs are taken care of properly." As they began their conversation with Mr. Ellis, I discreetly positioned myself near the door, listening intently. "Dad, you know we've been trying to make things easier for you," James said, his tone almost too smooth. "We've been looking into your investments and assets. It's important to make sure everything is sorted out." "Indeed," Mr. Ellis responded with a feigned tone of weakness. "I trust you both to handle these matters." Laura leaned in slightly, her voice lowered. "We're just concerned that there might be some complications. We don't want any issues after." She hesitated, but the implication was clear. They were discussing something that wasn't just about financial arrangements. I carefully noted their words, trying to keep my expression neutral as I recorded the conversation on my phone. I needed to gather concrete proof that would convince the authorities. That evening, after James and Laura had left, Mr. Ellis and I reviewed the day's findings. I played back the recordings, and Mr. Ellis's face grew darker as he listened. "They're being too cautious," Mr. Ellis said, his voice edged with worry. "We need to dig deeper. They're trying to cover their tracks, but they're slipping up." "I agree," I said. "We need more than just their vague threats. We need to find a way to get them to make a definitive move or statement that clearly shows their intentions." Mr. Ellis thought for a moment. "There's a family dinner planned for next week. They'll be discussing everything in detail. If we can get an invitation, we might hear something crucial." I nodded, understanding the significance. "I'll see if I can manage an invitation. If they're as careless as they've been, it shouldn't be too difficult." The next few days were spent in careful planning. I managed to arrange a way to attend the family dinner under the guise of a temporary nurse or caregiver for Mr. Ellis. It wasn't ideal, but it was the best option available. On the night of the dinner, I arrived at the Ellis family home dressed professionally and prepared to blend in. The atmosphere was tense, filled with strained smiles and polite conversation. I observed the interactions between James, Laura, and Mr. Ellis, carefully noting their behavior. At one point, James pulled Laura aside for a private conversation in a quiet corner of the dining room. I excused myself from my duties and followed at a distance, catching snippets of their discussion. "We need to make sure this goes off without a hitch," James said, his voice low but intense. "The sooner we act, the sooner we get what we want." "I know," Laura replied. "But we have to be absolutely certain that no one suspects anything. We can't afford to mess this up." I silently recorded their conversation, feeling a mix of relief and anxiety. The evidence was becoming more concrete, but the risk was also increasing. The evening ended with a sense of accomplishment, but also heightened tension. I returned to Mr. Ellis's room and played back the recordings for him. "This conversation confirms their intentions," Mr. Ellis said, reviewing the evidence with a sigh of relief. "We have what we need. Now it's time to prepare for the final confrontation." I felt a rush of determination. We're getting closer to exposing them. Let's make sure we have everything in order before we make our move. As I left the estate that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that the stakes had never been higher. We were on the brink of unveiling a dark family secret, and the next steps would be crucial in ensuring justice for Mr. Ellis. The day of the confrontation arrived with a mix of anticipation and apprehension. Mr. Ellis and I had carefully planned every detail, knowing that this was our chance to finally expose James and Laura's plot. Our strategy was to lure them into a situation where they would reveal their true intentions. The plan was simple. Mr. Ellis would feign a worsening condition to draw James and Laura to his side. I would then be ready to call in the authorities once their malicious intent was clear. The dinner table was set, and the atmosphere was charged with a sense of impending drama. As the clock neared the time of James and Laura's scheduled visit, Mr. Ellis appeared frail, resting in his chair as if he were struggling. I took my place discreetly in the corner of the room, ready to act if needed. The door opened, and James and Laura walked in, their faces masked with concern. James immediately approached Mr. Ellis, his expression a mix of worry and calculated detachment. "Dad, how are you feeling?" James asked, though his eyes betrayed an eagerness that didn't match his words. "Not well," Mr. Ellis replied in a weak, trembling voice. "I've been feeling worse lately. I'm afraid I might not have much time left." Laura moved closer, her eyes sharp and calculating. "We should discuss everything while we still have the chance. It's important to make sure all the arrangements are in order." I watched closely, ready to record any incriminating remarks. As James and Laura began discussing Mr. Ellis's final arrangements, they spoke with an unsettling calm, as if they were discussing mundane tasks. After a few minutes of this unsettling conversation, Mr. Ellis made a deliberate move. He looked at both James and Laura with a mix of wariness and resolve. "I know what you two are planning," Mr. Ellis said quietly, his voice surprisingly steady. "I've been awake for a while, and I've heard everything." James's eyes widened momentarily, but he quickly masked his shock with anger. "What are you talking about? You're just confused." Laura stepped forward, her face pale but composed. "Dad, you must be mistaken. We're just trying to help you." "Help me?" Mr. Ellis said, his voice rising slightly. "You're planning to kill me to get my money. I have evidence of your plot, and I've already called the police." At this signal, I stepped forward and discreetly dialed the number for the police. My heart raced as I tried to remain calm. The confrontation reached its peak when the sound of sirens approached the estate. James and Laura's facade of concern crumbled as they realized the gravity of the situation. Panic replaced their earlier composure. "Mr. Ellis, you don't know what you're saying," James said, desperation evident in his voice. "This is a mistake." "It's not a mistake," Mr. Ellis retorted. "I have everything documented. You're under arrest." The door burst open as the police arrived, and officers quickly moved to restrain James and Laura. The look of disbelief and fear on their faces was palpable. As James and Laura were led away in handcuffs, I felt a mix of relief and sadness. They had been caught, but it was tragic to see family members torn apart by greed. One of the officers approached me, a look of professional curiosity on his face. "Thank you for your help in this matter. We'll need to review the evidence you have and make sure everything is documented properly." "I've got all the recordings and notes," I said, handing over my phone and notes. "I hope this helps secure a conviction." The officer nodded. "It will. Thanks for your bravery." Once the authorities had taken James and Laura into custody, Mr. Ellis and I sat down to review what had transpired. The tension of the evening had left us both exhausted but hopeful. "I can't believe it's over," Mr. Ellis said, his voice trembling with a mix of relief and fatigue. "You've done more for me than I could have ever expected." "I'm just glad we could get justice," I replied, feeling a sense of accomplishment. "It's been a difficult journey, but it was worth it." Mr. Ellis smiled weakly. "Thank you, Megan. I owe you everything." As I left the estate that night, I felt a profound sense of closure. We had succeeded in exposing the plot and ensuring justice for Mr. Ellis. The road ahead would involve legal proceedings and healing, but for now, I was content knowing that we had made a difference. With James and Laura Ellis in custody, the aftermath of their arrest brought a mix of relief and new challenges. The legal proceedings began, and Mr. Ellis and I faced the task of preparing for court while navigating the emotional and practical repercussions of the case. The first few days after the arrest were filled with a flurry of activity. I continued to visit Mr. Ellis regularly, assisting him in organizing his evidence and preparing for the upcoming court hearings. Despite the emotional toll, he remained resolute, determined to see justice served. One afternoon, as we sat in Mr. Ellis's study, sorting through the documentation and evidence, he looked up at me with a sense of gratitude and exhaustion. "I never thought I'd be in this position," he said quietly. "It's been a whirlwind." "It's understandable," I replied, sorting through the files. "You've been through a lot, and now it's about making sure everything is ready for court." Mr. Ellis nodded. "I'm just so grateful for your support. I don't think I could have done this without you." "You would have," I assured him. "You're stronger than you realize, but I'm glad I could help." As the court date approached, Mr. Ellis and I met with his attorney to go over the case and ensure we were fully prepared. The attorney, a seasoned professional named Mr. Reynolds, reviewed the evidence and offered guidance. "We have a strong case," Mr. Reynolds said, examining the evidence we had gathered. "The recordings, documents, and witness statements are all compelling. We'll need to present them clearly and effectively to ensure a conviction." "I trust your judgment," Mr. Ellis replied. "I just want this to be over so I can start healing." The courtroom was packed on the day of the trial. James and Laura appeared in their formal attire, trying to maintain a veneer of composure despite the gravity of the situation. The tension in the room was palpable as the trial began. The prosecution presented the evidence, and the recordings and documentation clearly demonstrated the siblings' intent to murder Mr. Ellis for his fortune. The courtroom was silent as the evidence unfolded, with James and Laura appearing increasingly distressed. During a recess, Mr. Reynolds approached us with an encouraging look. "The evidence is speaking for itself. It's just a matter of time now." "I hope so," Mr. Ellis said, his hands trembling slightly. "I just want to see this through to the end." The trial continued for several days, with testimonies and cross-examinations further cementing the case against James and Laura. Finally, the verdict was delivered. Both James and Laura were found guilty of conspiracy to commit murder and sentenced to long prison terms. As we left the courthouse, Mr. Ellis and I took a moment to reflect on the outcome. "I can't believe it's finally over," Mr. Ellis said, his voice filled with relief. "It feels like a weight has been lifted." "It does," I agreed. "Justice has been served, and now you can start focusing on your recovery and moving forward." In the weeks that followed, Mr. Ellis began to regain a sense of normalcy. He started attending therapy sessions to process the trauma of the ordeal and began making plans for the future. Our bond, forged through adversity, grew stronger, and we remained in touch as he continued to rebuild his life. One afternoon, as I visited Mr. Ellis to check on his progress, he looked at me with a warm, grateful smile. "Megan, I want to thank you again for everything. You've done more than you'll ever know." "It was an honor to help," I replied, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. "I'm just glad we could get the justice you deserved." Mr. Ellis nodded, his eyes reflecting a mixture of gratitude and hope. "I'll always remember your bravery and kindness. It's given me a new outlook on life." As I left the estate, I felt a profound sense of accomplishment and closure. The journey had been challenging, but seeing Mr. Ellis find peace and justice was the ultimate reward. Our shared experience had forged a lasting bond, and I knew that, despite the hardships, we had both emerged stronger and more hopeful for the future. With the court case behind us and James and Laura Ellis serving their sentences, life began to shift into a new phase for both Mr. Ellis and me. The legal battle had left its mark, but it also opened doors to new opportunities and personal growth. For Mr. Ellis, it was a chance to rebuild his life with a renewed sense of purpose, and for me, it marked the beginning of a new chapter in my career and personal life. Several weeks after the trial, I visited Mr. Ellis at his estate. The atmosphere in the house was markedly different, lighter and filled with a sense of renewal. The house was undergoing renovations, a symbolic gesture towards new beginnings. As I walked through the front door, Mr. Ellis greeted me with a warm smile. "Megan, welcome back. The renovations are finally underway. It's been a long road, but things are looking up." "I can see that," I replied, taking in the changes. "The house looks like it's starting to come back to life." Mr. Ellis chuckled. "It is. I've been thinking a lot about what's next, and I want to make the most of this fresh start. We settled in Mr. Ellis's study, where he shared his plans for the future. I've decided to set up a charitable foundation in honor of my late wife, he said, his eyes reflecting a mix of nostalgia and determination. She always wanted to help those in need, and I think this is a fitting tribute. That's a wonderful idea, I said, genuinely moved. Your wife would be proud. How can I assist with this? Mr. Ellis smiled. I'd love your help with the foundation's initial planning. Your organizational skills and experience would be invaluable. I'd be honored, I agreed. Let's get started. Over the next few months, Mr. Ellis and I worked together on establishing the foundation. We focused on areas that were close to his heart, such as supporting underprivileged youth and funding medical research. The process was both challenging and rewarding, and it gave us both a sense of purpose. One evening, as we reviewed the foundation's progress, Mr. Ellis looked at me with a thoughtful expression. Megan, I wanted to ask, what are your plans now that the case is behind us? I've been thinking about that, I admitted. The experience has made me realize how much I value helping people. I'm considering shifting my career towards social work or nonprofit management. Mr. Ellis nodded appreciatively. That sounds like a natural progression for you. You have a gift for connecting with people and making a difference. In addition to the foundation, Mr. Ellis decided to travel and explore new experiences. He had always put his personal life on hold for his business and family, and now he wanted to embrace life's adventures. He invited me to join him on a trip to Europe, a gesture of friendship and appreciation. I'd love to, I said when he extended the invitation. It would be a great way to celebrate this new chapter. The trip was an unforgettable experience. We traveled through various countries, visiting historic sites, museums, and enjoying local cuisine. It was a time of relaxation and reflection, allowing both of us to recharge and enjoy life's simple pleasures. One evening, as we sat on a terrace overlooking a beautiful European city, Mr. Ellis raised his glass. To new beginnings, he said with a smile, and to the wonderful friendship that's come out of this journey. To new beginnings, I echoed, clinking my glass with his, and to the future. Upon returning from our trip, Mr. Ellis continued to work on his foundation, and I began exploring opportunities in the nonprofit sector. We kept in touch regularly, sharing updates on our respective journeys and continuing to support each other. One day, Mr. Ellis called me with exciting news. The foundation's first major event is coming up, and I'd love for you to be a guest speaker. Your story and dedication would be inspiring for our supporters. I'd be thrilled, I replied, feeling honored. Thank you for the opportunity. As I prepared for the event, I reflected on how far we had come since that fateful day when I first met Mr. Ellis. Our lives had intertwined in unexpected ways, and the challenges we faced had led to profound growth and new beginnings. The event was a success, with many in attendance praising the Foundation's mission and the positive impact it was already making. I spoke about my experiences, the importance of perseverance, and the value of compassion. As I looked out at the audience, I felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The journey from the initial job offer to this moment of triumph had been transformative, and I was grateful for the chance to make a difference in both Mr. Ellis's life and my own. The chapter closed with a sense of hope and possibility, as both Mr. Ellis and I embarked on our new paths, guided by the lessons learned and the friendships forged along the way. As autumn settled in, bringing a crisp, fresh energy to the air, both Mr. Ellis and I found ourselves eagerly stepping into the new opportunities that lay ahead. The success of the foundation and the personal transformations we had undergone were leading us to fresh beginnings, not only in our professional lives, but in our personal worlds as well. One crisp October morning, I sat at my desk, organizing papers for an upcoming foundation meeting when my phone rang. It was Mr. Ellis. "Megan, I hope I'm not interrupting," he said warmly. "Not at all," I replied. "What's up?" "I wanted to share some exciting news," he said, his voice full of enthusiasm. The foundation has received a generous donation from a corporate sponsor. It's a significant amount that will allow us to expand our programs. That's fantastic news, I exclaimed. What does this mean for us? It means we can launch new initiatives sooner than we expected, Mr. Ellis said. I'd like us to brainstorm some ideas for how to best utilize this funding. Let's meet up at the office later today. Sounds like a plan, I agreed. I'll see you then. Later that day, we met at the Foundation's office, where Mr. Ellis and I spent hours discussing potential projects and planning how to maximize the impact of the new funds. Our excitement was palpable as we laid out the blueprints for several new programs, including scholarships for underprivileged students and a health initiative for underserved communities. As we wrapped up, Mr. Ellis leaned back in his chair and said, "Megan, I've been thinking about how much we've accomplished together. Your dedication has been invaluable, and I want to express my gratitude." "It's been a rewarding journey," I said, feeling touched by his words. "I'm grateful for the opportunity to be part of this and to work with someone as inspiring as you." Mr. Ellis smiled. "Well, I was wondering if you'd be interested in taking on a more prominent role in the foundation, perhaps even a leadership position." I looked at him, surprised and honored. "I'd be thrilled. It would be an incredible opportunity to make an even greater impact." In the weeks that followed, I officially stepped into my new role, overseeing several key initiatives and working closely with a dedicated team of staff and volunteers. The foundation's reach and influence began to grow, and I found immense satisfaction in the work we were doing. One evening, as I was leaving the office, I received a message from an old friend, Sarah, who had heard about my recent career shift and wanted to catch up. We arranged to meet at a local cafe. When Sarah arrived, she greeted me with a warm hug. "Megan, it's been ages. I've been following your journey and am so proud of everything you've accomplished." "It's great to see you, Sarah," I said. "I'm excited to catch up and hear about what you've been up to." We spent the next hour chatting about our lives, sharing stories of triumphs and challenges. Sarah expressed her admiration for my new role and the impact I was making. "I've always admired your ability to turn challenges into opportunities," Sarah said. "It's inspiring to see how you've taken such a difficult situation and transformed it into something so positive." "Thank you," I said, feeling a deep sense of appreciation. "It's been a journey of growth, and I'm grateful for the support and encouragement from friends like you." Back at Mr. Ellis's estate, the Foundation's new programs were in full swing. Mr. Ellis and I continued to work closely, and our efforts were making a tangible difference in the community. Our partnership had grown beyond professional collaboration. It had evolved into a deep and genuine friendship. One afternoon, Mr. Ellis and I stood on the estate's veranda, overlooking the gardens we had started to revitalize as part of a community project. "Look at what we've achieved," Mr. Ellis said, his eyes reflecting pride. "It's amazing to see the difference we're making." "It really is," I agreed. "And it feels incredible to be part of something that's helping so many people." Mr. Ellis turned to me with a thoughtful expression. "Megan, I've been reflecting on our journey. Your strength, resilience, and compassion have been nothing short of extraordinary." "Thank you, Mr. Ellis," I said, touched by his words. "Your vision and generosity have been the driving force behind all of this." As the year drew to a close, both Mr. Ellis and I took time to reflect on the progress we had made and the new paths we were forging. The foundation was thriving, and my role within it had become both challenging and fulfilling. Personally, I felt a renewed sense of purpose and connection to the work I was doing. Our final meeting of the year was a celebration of our achievements and a moment to look forward to the future. We shared our hopes for the coming year and planned for new projects and initiatives that would continue to make a difference. As we clinked glasses in a toast to the year's successes and future endeavors, I felt a profound sense of satisfaction and optimism. "To new beginnings and continued impact," Mr. Ellis said, raising his glass. "To a brighter future," I echoed, smiling as we celebrated the new chapter of our lives. In this new chapter, Filled with hope and promise, we embraced the opportunities ahead and the friendships that had blossomed along the way. Our journey had come full circle, leading us to a place of fulfillment and new beginnings.